Welcome to another episode of The Warrior's Walk. I'm Keith, and this is Todd. And today we're going to be talking about how to set up finances for success in just 5 simple steps. So stay tuned.
Looking at the demographics, a lot of you are 25 through 35 years old, and we want to give you a leg up, on things that we learned the hard way. So you don't need a major course correction at your age.
Well, I heard someone say, if you want to change the world, someone's got to pay for it. And
my heart and mind went to Jimmy Stewart after he rescued Clarence in that little shack there. And he was just lamenting about, we don't need money in heaven. And he just looked at me and was like, well, it comes in pretty handy down here, bub.
Yeah. Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God said, never will I leave you, or never will I forsake you.
But so many of them said, I could get a pretty good picture of your spiritual life if I could just see your checkbook.
When we paid that last student loan payment, it was one of my student loans, we paid that off, and it literally felt like we lost 100 pounds. Like it's like we felt lighter. Like it was like this burden off our back. And so, all right, now Todd, they say you only need love. Love makes the world go around. All you need is love. But realistically, you also need money to survive, right? I mean, you need to have a good budget and plan. In fact, when we do premarital counseling with anyone, we also say, hey, it's a good idea to talk about finances. In fact, a lot of the issues that come up in marriage are related to finances.
Yep.
And so today we wanted to talk about just some financial principles that we can even glean from scripture, maybe from some personal experience as well, that will kind of set us up for lasting success to really steward God's resources well for you and your family. I'm gonna do a hard curveball right here and ask you a question.
All right.
What was your first job that you earned money for?
A dishwasher.
Was this for a restaurant or just like a
church?
A church.
Yeah. It was the only job I was fired from too.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I was late. I was trying to, I was wrestling, and coach hammered us, and I was hauling the mail to my job, and the lady in charge, she did not tolerate tardiness. And so she canned me. I actually got teary-eyed over it too.
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
That was like the what set you up for success the rest of your life. You developed.
Right. I will be on time.
Yeah, you're going to be on time. Yeah.
Well, before you leave the whole, all you need is love. As soon as you said that, and if the listeners Keith loves to just go off script, so this is just normal living for me. But every Christmas Eve we attempt to watch It's a Wonderful Life, and my heart and mind went to Jimmy Stewart after he rescued Clarence in that little shack there. And he was just lamenting about, we don't need money in heaven. And he just looked at me and was like, well, it comes in pretty handy down here, bub.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yep,
there you go.
It does.
There you go. Well, I heard someone say, if you want to change the world, someone's got to pay for it. And I think that's a good principle. I mean, just to realize that regardless of if we love finances or plan for finances or handle finances well, it is how our system is set up. We need money to pay our bills. We can determine what our bills look like sometimes as far as what we commit to. But at the end of the day, stewarding God's resources, I think it's an important topic to discuss. Mm-hmm. So, the vast majority of, even disagreements between spouses are over finances, and even just, we see people that get later in their lives that didn't plan well or didn't steward finances well. And now they're reaping the consequences of that. And so there's 2 ends of the spectrum, even within the Christian circles, of one, trust the Lord and not plan wisely for your future. And then the opposite end is is more of a world perspective of just seeking after riches at the expense of others, or, even to where, we want to balance what even John Piper calls wartime living, where we're sacrificially giving, because there's ministries that need, support, but at the same time, what are we sacrificing personally so that we can be freed up to give more? Versus what's too much to keep? What is considered, too much to save, or to not give away, or to commit to the debt. So we're going to go over some five principles that we have from Scripture. Share a little bit about our personal journeys through different financial failures and successes maybe. And so the first one is start with a plan. So we have in Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. And so I would say if you don't have a clear budget, where you don't even realize what you're spending and what you're bringing in, to balance that out, to say, okay, I know how much money I'm bringing home. Like some people just know how much money their salary is or whatever, but they don't really know what's actually getting, to them after taxes and other expenses or whatever, that are taken out of their paychecks. So what is your take home pay? And then what do you spend in each category of your fixed income or fixed, for bills like your rent or your mortgage or utilities or childcare or whatever that is, to get a clear plan in place of how much you're spending versus how much you're taking in.
Good old-fashioned revenue and expenses.
Yes.
It's like we almost had a meeting about that today.
Yeah, we actually talked about that with our church today. And but just even having a clear budget, but not just assessing where you are, but have a clear financial plan. So if you are in debt, how are you going to alleviate that? Not just hope that you win the lottery or hope that someone just gives you a bunch of money to remedy the decisions that you made in the past that brought you to where you are now. And so I would say have a clear budget to find out where you are, but then have a strategic or a strategy, a plan in place to help you to reach the goals that you want to get to, that you might feel the Lord's calling you to do. And part of that is prioritizing essential expenses, setting goals, and avoiding impulsive decisions. So start with a plan. That's like the very, at least assess where you are, assess where you want to be or want to, head towards. And some of those goals might be, I want to be able to give more generously. Okay, well, what things you need to put in place that would free up more finances so that you can give more generously? I want to get out of debt. Okay, what is the debt that you have? Categorize that, and we'll talk about that in point 3 here. But the next one that I have is to give generously. Now, it's not on everybody's radar to even give financially, right? So we don't even have that as part of our culture always, where people just think it's like, well, I earn my money, I get to do whatever I want with it. But being a Christian and a follower of Jesus is a little bit different, and it's not. There's even differing opinions on giving within the Christian world. Could you expound on that a little bit? Like, what are some of the differing opinions that you might have, like when it comes to tithe versus like giving more than a tithe, or should we, are we sinning if we don't give a tithe? Are we, giving too much if we give more than a tithe? Like, what are some things that you've observed as a pastor?
Yeah, I think Old Testament tithe's pretty clear, the 10%, and it's throughout the entire Old Testament. New Testament, if people really want to get persnickety about it, it appears that they gave beyond 10%. Mm-hmm. And so, but what I don't see in there, just full disclaimer, is that it's like something mandatory, but it's almost an expectation. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really, ultimately, and I've read it from so many pastors that I've, and Christian authors that I feel uncomfortable quoting just one of them, but so many of them said, like, I could get a pretty good picture of your spiritual life if I could just see your checkbook. Mm. And again, it's telling on what we spend our money on. And there's definitely been seasons where my wife and we have spent money for us and for our kids and really weren't thinking about beyond that. And then we finally, and again, we can get into this more later, but I was so naive, in the military, because up until that point, I bought everything cash because that's just how I grew up. And then I was getting ready to deploy, and my wife, with a brand new baby boy, she needed a reliable car, and what I was leaving her with was not reliable. And so I went to the car lot, and the cheapest car on the car lot I couldn't pay cash for, and so I was like, well, I'm sure I got excellent credit, and they're like, you actually have none. Like, you've never established any credit. I was like, what are you talking about? I bought everything cash, and so I didn't even know what credit was. And so I think that's where our journey began, and we definitely handled finances very poorly in the beginning. It was like, credit card means you're rich. And then you found out that's not true. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, certainly and again, what is it, it's not a Christian book, but it's pretty valuable. The lessons, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's this ideal, like a lot of wealthy people actually do teach their kids how to handle money, and they have a much better understanding of it. Yeah. Where if you didn't grow up in that world, you don't have a clue because they don't teach it in school.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I think with even just going back to the giving generously aspect, where in the Old Testament we see that there's a tithe rule. It was a totally different setup, though. So like you had the nation of Israel that were getting these commands, and they didn't have a government, so they didn't pay taxes. So part of their first fruits were to
Support
the
the
temple, were to so it was
Levites.
basically like the if I remember correctly, it was like actually closer to 30% because there was three different 10% of
Correct.
and then usually even more for certain offerings that they would give. And of course, it wasn't always finances; it was crops or
Animals.
animals or so. So even in the Old Testament tithe, it wasn't simply just 10%, but of course they had a different, so their nation was also their government. I mean, their people was also the government. So but then, in the New Testament, we have a few different guidelines. Is 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So I think that joyously is a key ingredient for giving in the New Testament. So like, don't do it because you're obligated to, but also generously. To decide what you have. What the Lord's put on your heart to give, and I think just a healthy goal is maybe to even have a floor of your giving be 10%, and then if the Lord allows you to, or if you're making it an intentional strategy, like we talked about, starting with a plan to give more to give more generously as the Lord provides, and I think the question isn't how much should I give to the Lord, it should be how much should I keep, and to kind of wrestle with that tension.
Well, and speaking of tension, just because you and I, we have to be aware of budgets and stuff like that, but not just our church, but churches at large. I think statistically across America, most people are given 1%.
Yeah.
And if everybody who was a part of their church gave 10%, like so many problems could be alleviated, like locally and globally, because the church would have a lot more harumph behind it.
Yeah.
And so, I think if everybody, actually chipped in and understood that they were investing in eternity, the church would be, a lot more successful on the mission field.
Well, and I think it sometimes comes down to prioritizing. So if we want to be more generous, sometimes we have to say no to the wrong things to say yes to the right things. And there's been times where I've even talked with people, not in like just because they genuinely were coming to me for advice, just as a pastor or just as a friend, where they're like, I want to give more, but we just bought this golf membership to this really high-end country club. And it's like, well, which one do you want? Like, and so I think there is, different thing, or it's like, I can't give right now because we just committed to, this very expensive optional thing in our lives.
Right.
And so I think there's a priority thing that it often comes down to. And, Jesus is clear that where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. And I think oftentimes it's not a matter of the amount of money, because we see that even in
the widow's mite.
The widow's mite, it's that she gave,
everything.
Was it 2 copper coins, but that was everything she had. And he's like, that's actually more. She gave more than the person that's dropping tons of money.
Gave out of abundance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Well,
so that go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that, one of our buddies, I remember he deals with a lot of different men in ministry, and he asked one of the guys one time, he's like, what would sacrificial giving look like for you? And the guy was like, I have no idea. Like, that's how much money he had. Yeah. He's like, would giving $1 million, would that be like sacrificial? He's like, I don't think so. Oh. So, I mean, there's all these different
Can you
levels.
introduce me to this guy?
Yeah.
No, when it comes down to
sponsor this podcast.
Well, I remember, so there was, I remember it was like so being I wasn't really raised in the church, so to speak. Like I came to Christ as a teenager, and for whatever, like it just didn't even like seem like a big deal to me. I'm like, okay, the Lord, I give money to the Lord. Like, it's not even like, if that's what he says to do, then that's what I should do. And so it wasn't even like a thing where even, I remember there was it was actually a Campus Crusade missionary that came to speak at our church when I was a teenager. And so my mom, she was in the banking industry. And so she taught me different financial stuff and everything. And I just remember hearing the missionary pitch, where she needed some money to help fund this project that she was working on. And so, we were supposed to go, like get back to her, whatever, about it, if we wanted to give towards this thing, whatever. And so I just remember I didn't have much money. I was a teenager working, it wasn't like I was rolling the dough, whatever, but I was like, I'm just going to give her whatever I have in my checking account. And my mom was like, what? She's like, and I was like, well, I can just make more money. Like, it's no big deal. Like, and she's like, what are you doing? And it was like this, but I just saw it as like well, this is what needs to happen. I have the ability to do it. Like, it wasn't a big deal. And so that was just the mentality I had, like, and where I was like, well, I can always just make more money, whatever. So I'll just give whatever. And then I married someone who's very frugal and very like, saving conscious, Caroline. And so this was like a thing where there was actually it wasn't a huge disagreement. She was actually grateful that I am like this, but I actually, the most amount of money that it wasn't like I spent money on a new boat or something like that. I actually committed to give money that I didn't talk to her about even after we were married. And I came home to her and I was like, I committed to give this amount. She was like, what? It was money that we didn't really have yet that I committed to give. And so she, she's like, well, I'm not mad that you did that. I'm just mad that we didn't talk about it before, so I would say, even if you're married, to discuss like a generosity plan, with your spouse. And the coolest story of that, how that ended, was that, the project that we ended up giving to, it was in a different country. We went to go visit that country. And then as I was flying back from that country, we received a check in the mail from a family member that had passed like years before. And they had left me exactly double the amount that I gave. And I was like, I mean, now not to say that like, okay, if you give money to this, then you'll get double back. Like, that's not,
die.
Yeah. No, like that was not, but it was just so the Lord's timing of that was just like affirmation of like, okay, the Lord did want you to give that, maybe in a more responsible way to discuss with your wife before, but it was kind of a cool, experience. So number 3 is avoid debt when possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
is there good debt and bad debt?
This is a big topic here. So just part of Caroline and I's journey is that we were in debt. Not like we've never had credit card debt. Like, we didn't have any consumer debt. I had student loans, and we had purchased a new car after Hudson was born. And then we went through the whole Dave Ramsey, like, total money makeover. Like, it was like a transformational experience. And man, once I read that book, and once I, went through, like, and it was funny because, like, I didn't even want to give any money to Dave Ramsey, like, to buy it, because you can buy a, course curriculum, like, you can buy books, whatever, all that stuff. And I was like, I want to do this. Like, I want to be so hungry for the knowledge about learning how to handle this that I don't want to spend any money on it. Like, and I was like, So anyway, so I researched all of his free stuff. Like, I looked up the baby stuff on his website, read blog articles, listened to his free radio program, and went all in on Dave Ramsey stuff. I would say there's some things that, like, that are very, very good that he taught that helped us actually get out of debt. So we got out of our consumer debt. I would say some debt might be okay. Like, we have a mortgage. Mm-hmm. He would say that you shouldn't have a mortgage. You should buy a house in cash. But if you can't, to do a 15-year loan with 25% of your take-home pay, the payment being under that. Now, knowing what we know about where we live in the DC metro area, that would be nearly impossible to ever buy a house. So we took that kind of with a grain of salt. So anyway, so I say all that to say, we are still really against debt, consumer debt. So making decisions that would, like a car payment or, credit card debt or anything like that. So I would say avoid debt when possible. I'd say there's some things that I would probably make a caveat, but I'm, again, not a financial planner or expert, but that's just personally. But we do see in Proverbs 22, the borrower is slave to the lender. And we definitely felt that. When we paid that last student loan payment, it was one of my student loans, we paid that off, and it literally felt like we lost 100 pounds. Like, it was like we felt lighter. Like, it was like this, like, burden off our back. And so, so I would say when it comes to debt, avoid it if possible. But I know that's not always the reality for most. So do you have a take on it? Do you have is there good debt, bad debt?
I totally agree. I mean, my heart goes to a very unbiblical song, a country song, and it's just like, credit cards don't mean you're rich, right? And debt in itself, it really can. It's caused stress in our own marriage and friends, and it's just one of those things to avoid when possible. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other one out there is that anybody at any certain point in their life with their family, they can get hit with these huge medical bills and they don't have things in place, right? And so there is a time where, it's just like, yeah. And that's why I think, the church is called to have benevolence where we can come alongside and help people. I'm so thankful, when our granddaughter had leukemia. I mean, she was life flighted, and that life flight was like $60,000. But because my son was in the military, it was covered. But if he had just gotten out, like we talked 3 months prior, and he was deciding whether to stay in or get out, if he would have gotten out and got just a, whatever job and his insurance dropped him, now he has millions of dollars of bills to keep his little girl alive on top of the stress is my daughter going to live.
Yep. And
so it's just a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah. Well, and I would say on that too, like if you feel overwhelmed because you have debt, whether it's, I would say that's accidental debt. Like that's like unexpected, like medical bills, like those can, now there are some ways that you can prevent them. Like, if you don't even have insurance, you shouldn't be surprised if you have medical debt piling up, whatever. Cause it's like, okay, let's try to get insurance. And there's a whole, that's like an onion peeling back layers and stuff. There's lots of different, aspects to that. But I would say if you're approaching debt and you're overwhelmed by how much you have and you want to plan to get out, I do recommend what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball, where, and by the way, this doesn't always even financially make sense as far as like mathematical, but he would say to pay your lowest balance off first, not your highest interest rate. Yeah. So if you paid your highest interest rate, that would actually save you the most money. But psychologically, it's too far. Like it's too, like if that's like your highest balance and it's also the highest interest rate, you're not going to stick with it as much as if you paid off your smaller amount first and then you took that payment and you roll that into, attacking the next, the next smallest balance. So if you have a list of debts like your car, your student loans, credit card, whatever, list them all out, the balance of them, the percentage rate that you're being charged on them, and then try to pay off the smallest balance first and then roll that into the next smallest balance and so forth. And we found that was really helpful. We didn't have huge, high interest rate debt, so it wasn't like too complicated, to decide. But that was helpful because it almost like gave us power, like to feel like we could pay off more, like once we paid off that smaller one. And so we just kept rolling it in, and it took us, I think it was just under 2 years to pay off.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, it was like 23 months, and we paid off $54,000, which on youth pastor salary was like
you were living like Spartans.
We call it scorched earth living, and so that was actually, so going back to our original question, my first job was actually assembling bicycles. Did you know that? So at the local bike shop, I got paid to come in and put together the new bikes.
Okay.
I got paid per bike, but what I learned was how to work on bikes. Even though it wasn't like troubleshooting broken bikes, it was just putting together, and so I learned how to work on bikes. So during the debt snowball phase, I don't even know how many, I think it might've been close to 100 bikes that I either bought and flipped, or like someone gave them to me and then I sold them, or, people were throwing them away and I fixed them up or whatever and sold them. So I had my own like bike flipping business to generate some more income during that time. So
nice.
So anyways, yeah. So I attribute the debt snowball. But it's possible. We didn't have high incomes, but we still were able to pull it off. And, in just under 2 years. Now it was a long stretch that felt like 20 years to us.
I bet.
Yeah, but it was good. And, Dave Ramsey has a saying, it's good. Like live like no one else now so that you can live like no one else later. Yeah. And so we're not even in that position completely, but we feel like we're living like no one else now because we live like no one else then, Yeah. And so we're in a new season. But okay, so the fourth one, save and invest wisely. And I say wisely because that's crucial, because there's a lot of, I think, gambling happening with investments that are unwise. So you have investments that people are making, and even as we were talking about this before, like not everybody, I feel like I'm in the thick of this more. I have some friends that are into crypto, and I'm not like all in with cryptocurrency, but right now, at least as we're recording this, there's a big increase of crypto happening right now, where a lot of people are generating a lot of income because of the investments that they've made in cryptocurrency. And so I would say that's not always that's not the traditional way of investing, but for some that's been very profitable. But I would say there's also people that are very unhealthily losing a lot of money and almost gambling it away in that sense. But yeah, I mean, whether that's the way of the future or not, I still think having a diversified approach of what you invest in would be wise. How do you save money? Like if someone's just struggling to just barely pay their bills, what would you recommend to save some money?
I think, the same principle for tithing and setting aside money for God's house is the same for saving. It's kind of like it's one of those where you take care of that first, so it's just automatic. And then I've found like I wish I would have had those habits when I was younger, and that's why I actually asked Keith to do this episode. Is looking at the demographics. A lot of you are 25 through 35 years old, and we want to give you a leg up. On things that we learned the hard way. So you don't need a major course correction at your age. You can just put these principles in place, and you're going to be well on your way. So that when you're in your 60s, you can be like, I think actually I could stop working if I want to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think it's a principle, right? And it's understanding like compound interest, and like, hey, a little bit now will pay off big time later. Where if I wait till later, then it's going to take a whole lot, and then you are going to have scorched earth.
Yeah.
To even just make ends meet.
Definitely. Yeah. So the sooner you can start investing and, the safer, bet long-term, if you have time on your side, so you're talking like 20, 30 years before retirement, 40 years before retirement, a Roth IRA is a great investment strategy. So taking the money that you've already earned and paid taxes on, and then putting that into a individual retirement account. A Roth means that you've already paid the tax on it, so you'll never have to pay tax on it again.
Right.
So that's a huge benefit because most likely tax rates will go up over time, like is what most people would say, and it's been true over time. So you want to get to the point where you're putting money that's already been paid taxes away for your retirement, so that you don't have to pay it again. Now you could easy thing is like if you work for a company that does employee matching. So like if you contribute a certain percentage, then they'll contribute a certain percentage. That is easy way to double your money. Now, none of that is ever Roth though. So in other words, that's always pre-tax.
Why don't you help people out too with math, as far as with the tax thing, just show them a difference. I bet you can do this off the top of your head, but let's say someone has $300,000 in their retirement account. Yeah. Like, does that mean they get $300,000 when they retire?
No. If it's in a regular, like a tax-free account. So so if you have a Roth IRA, you will actually get $300,000.
Yeah. Let's say they don't. They have the
traditional. If you have the traditional like 401k or 403b or whatever, depending on so then you have, which by the way, I'm not a tax expert. Sure. I'm not a financial planner or anything, but just being
we want to get your wheels spinning.
Yes, yeah. So it depends on your tax bracket whenever you want to withdraw that. So if you're at retirement age, which I think right now you can do it 62 and a half or something weird like that. I'm still far away, so I don't have to think of it. But it'll probably increase as the life expectancy for people keeps going up. So anyways, with that though, once your retirement age, whatever your income tax bracket is at that time is what you'd have to pay on that money. And you probably wouldn't be wise to withdraw it all at once, because then that would put you at a higher income tax. Sure. So, yeah. So, but 300,000, if you have that in a traditional IRA that's not Roth, then you're talking 30%, 25%.
Yeah, you could lose almost $100,000 right there. Poof.
Yeah. So, yeah, depends on your state also. So
good old uncle.
Yeah. So if you're in I think state can matter too. So Florida, Tennessee, no income tax, no state income tax.
Right.
So that can play into that too. So anyways, it's always better to pay taxes now, in my opinion, than have to worry about it later. But yeah, I'll always take advantage of that employee match if your company offers that. So saving and invest wisely. So I would say have an emergency fund. So this is a Dave Ramsey principle too. Emergency fund of about $1,000
Okay.
first. So that's like bare minimum, which $1,000 doesn't get you that far for an emergency that much anymore. But that will cover like new tires if you get a blowout in your tire or whatever. It might cover a broken water pump or
some kind of small repair.
Yeah, so small repairs in the house, whatever, that won't just knock you out. But once you get $1,000, go through your debt alleviation plan, and then or debt elimination plan, and then save up 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So that's going back to step number 1, the plan. having a clear budget of knowing how much your expenses are, and then times that by 3. Okay, that's your new saving goal. So if you have $3,000 worth of expenses a month, you need to have at least $9,000 of emergency fund, and that's like money that doesn't exist to you anymore.
Right.
Like, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I've got all this money now I can buy this or whatever. It's like, no, that just needs to be in a different account, even where you don't even see that anymore, so that you're not even tempted to buy something with it. And then if you can, pad that up to 6 months, emergency fund, to where, and then we say emergency fund, if you lost your income, if you lost your job, you would have, like, the average person spends 3 to 6 months looking for a new job. And so you need some money to fill that gap, in the meantime. Okay, so we have, let me just go through them again. So we have, number 1, start with a plan. Number 2, give generously. Number 3, avoid debt when possible. Number 4, save and invest wisely. And then last but not least, we have trust in God, not riches. So even though money is necessary for us to live in this, world that's designed around, finances and needing money to buy things and all this stuff, Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God said, never will I leave you, nor never will I forsake you. As you know, when you have teenagers, money will leave you.
Yes, it will.
It
Through
doesn't,
the refrigerator.
yeah, it doesn't stop just when they're teenagers, though, right? I mean, that's, yeah. And so money will leave you, but God will. And so that's a beautiful promise, that we want to trust in the Lord and build our life for eternity, not just in the temporal things of this world.
Well, when you become a grandparent, what's kind of cool is then you become a joyful giver.
Yeah.
You gladly spend money, and your kids recognize how much money you spend.
I was going to say, I was like, yeah, my parents
kids.
give my kids money that they never gave me. It's like, man,
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, but I turned out okay. So ultimately, success comes from just trusting God's provision and just stewarding the resources that He's given you. Think of it as income that you get. It's not yours. It's stewarding God's resources. He owns it all, and someone else will get it when you die. You can't take it with you, and so live for eternity instead of this little blip on the radar screen that we have. So,
Good word.
Yeah. Any other things that you would add before we close out?
No, I think you did a great job covering it. I thought, as I'm thinking about our demographic out there, I thought this would be especially when we're talking about survival and all these other things, like this is part of it.
Yep. Yeah. So. Which I think we're going to cover in a future episode. How much money should you spend on prepping? Or should you spend any money on prepping?
Exactly.
As a Christian? Should you?
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Yeah. So let's go with a survival tip on food preservation.
Yeah. So I thought this would be a good one to tie in with using money wisely. I've seen people harvest animals but not know how to preserve the meat, and then it all goes to waste. And so it's kind of like, doing an extravagant purchase, and as soon as you drive the car off the lot, it just dropped 10 grand in value. And so one of the ways that natives in the States, Alaska and the lower 48, have preserved meat for tons of years has been to smoke it. And so you cut your meat, whether it's fish, whether it's, venison, you name it, the thinner the better. You create your own drying racks and stuff like that, but you just lay it on there over a fire. And then there's principles in there where you want to be careful what type of wood you use to smoke, because you could use something that has a lot of resin in it, and then you can kind of put some really nasty stuff on your meat. But you want a nice hardwood and get some nice smoke on there. And by smoking your meat, you can preserve it. In an ideal world, you'd have salt. But again, in a survival situation, you're probably not carrying around, 40 pounds of salt and all that. So, but you should be able to build a fire, and you should be able to build something to cover it and smoke the fish, smoke the different meats, so that they'll last you a little bit longer. Excuse me. And then there are other ways where you can make pemmican, you can get fruit and stuff, and you can make like a little meatball with fruit. And again, it's kind of like, like John Wayne, the corn dodgers. I mean, you can just throw them in your bag and move out smartly. And because it has a little fat in there and it has the meat and the smoke and everything, it's actually a tasty little treat. And you can hit, it's got all the nutrients you need as you're moving out in the field. But preserving food, because again, if you're in a survival situation, you may hit a gold mine. You may catch a bunch of fish, and it's not like you're going to eat them all that day. So then how you get them to stay. And then the other thing that's really helpful, and this is a whole nother class, and maybe one day we can go out in some farmer's field and build one, but actually to have a food cache. So in some places, like in Alaska, you could actually create a food cache in the ground. Now, granted, critters will find it if you do, but you can almost cut you out a nice little box in the ground and put meat down there, and it actually keeps it right around like freezer temp. And so it keeps it right at 32, 33 degrees. So you can put meat down there, you can put your fruit down there, whatever you have. But then the food cache is the classic one to keep the critters out. Or like, you start to build these poles and you have little platforms. And then you got to get creative depending on what kind of animals are in the area. Like if you got a wolverine, good luck, right? Wolverines are very crafty. But you want to be able to get the meat off the ground. So even like when I would hunt with my son or others, we would always, the meat would be in the packs, and then we'd hoist them up and then pull them way out on a branch so that even if the bear got up there, they wouldn't be able to get out on the skinny branch. They probably could. They could just break it, right? But those are the things you want to think about, not only preserving it with the salt and the smoke and things like that, but then also how do you keep critters from eating it, because it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world out there, and they're hungry too, and they definitely know they'll find it because of smell. Now, last thing I'll throw out there is modern technology where you can get these bear containers and you get some really nice things where it actually doesn't smell at all. So as long as you're clean after you harvest your animal, then you should be good because it doesn't allow anything to off-gas. So food preservation definitely, I think, fits with our finance talk, and I think it's a wise way to go about preserving your hard-earned efforts in trapping or fishing.
There you go. Yeah. Well, that concludes another episode of The Warriors Walk. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'd love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. And also just, make sure that you're sharing our content with other people that may benefit from it. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.